Chris Ruppenthal is an American television and film writer based in Hollywood, California. He received an A.B. degree from Harvard University in 1976, where he was an editor of the Harvard Lampoon, as well as a member of the Delphic Club and the Hasty Pudding, where he performed in 3 of the famous Hasty Pudding travesty musicals. Following Harvard, he worked for a time in New York City in advertising, before moving to California to pursue a career in writing. He received an MA degree from the USC Film School. Ruppenthal boasts an impressive resume, credited as co-executive producer of The Outer Limits and Silk Stalkings, supervising producer of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, Touched by an Angel, Hearts of the West, and Covington Cross, and has writing credits for Blade the Series, The Outer Limits, Avalon Beyond the Abyss, The Pretender, Silk Stalkings, Lois and Clark, The X-Files, Touched by an Angel, Hearts of the West, The Adventures of Bisco County Jr., Covington Cross, Moonlighting, Sledgehammer, and Max Headroom. Ruppenthal currently resides in Los Angeles, where he continues to write for television and works for LAUSD at Berendo Middle School in the Pico Union District and the UCLA Extension School. For Leapers, however, Chris Ruppenthal does not need an introduction, being Quantum Leap royalty. He was a producer of the show for most of the series' run and completely wrote 9 episodes: Good Morning Peoria, Animal Frat, Freedom, One Strobe Over the Line, the Halloween episode, Glitter Rock, Hurricane, Roberto, and The Curse of Tahoe Tep, as well as co-writing the teleplay for The Last Gunfighter. Ruppenthal's only directorial credit is also from Quantum Leap. He directed Southern Comforts, an episode widely acclaimed for addressing the issue of domestic violence. He even made a cameo appearance as Sam's mirror image in the aforementioned episode that must not be named, which, along with writing the so-called cursed episode, earned him the nickname Ruppen Boogie. As such, it is very fitting that Ruppenthal is here to boogie with us for this episode of the podcast. Please enjoy Albie's conversation with Chris Ruppenthal.
Hello, Mr. Ruppenthal. Thank you so much for being on the Quantum Leap podcast. It's really an honor to have you on.
Well, Albie, thank you, and I'm happy to be here.
I'd like to start out by just asking you, you've had an amazing career, and if you check out your IMDb, it's just endless. And how did you start in the entertainment industry?
Well, I started in the entertainment industry. I had been in advertising in Manhattan on Madison Avenue. I was a madman for about 4 years, but I had been totally swept away by seeing Star Wars, which was prior to me being in advertising. And I decided ultimately that, hey, I want to go to film school. And the only film school to go to was where George Lucas went, which was USC Film School. So I applied to film school, and I got into USC. And I went to SC Film School. And the slightly amusing footnote to all this was I was working for an art director at the time who had previously worked in England. And when I broke the news to him that I was going to go to film school, he said, well, let me tell you a little story here. I had a guy working for me in the art department back in England, and he said to me, I'm going to go to film school. And I sort of laughed and said, good luck, and I hope it goes well for you. And that guy's name was Ridley Scott.
Huh.
So that inspired me more to go off to a film school, where I went to USC Film School and had a great time there, and had a lot of classmates there who've also been very talented people, among them like Jay Roach was the director. He's a great guy. And so after film school, I sort of fumbled around doing odd jobs, and then I was told of an opportunity. They were looking for a writer on a show called Sledgehammer. And Sledgehammer was an ABC 30-minute sitcom that was sort of a spoof of all the Dirty Harry movies. And so I sort of applied for that job. I got put in touch with the creator of that show, and he liked my work, and I got hired. And it was sort of like a whirlwind thing. It was suddenly out of the blue, hey, do you want to do a script for us? Because he liked the script, and I wrote a spec script. Not a spec script, I wrote a script for him, a rewrite for him, which they liked very much. And then I put a little note on it saying, hey, if somebody ever gets sick or hit by a truck, be happy to come in and fill in full time for them. And sure enough, like 3 weeks later, out of the blue, I got a phone call saying, hey, do you want to come work at Sledgehammer? which I did. And that was a lot of fun to work on that show because it was so different from every other sitcom out there. And it starred David Rasche, and he was a real character, and Anne-Marie Martin. And then from Sledgehammer, I went to Moonlighting, the last season of Moonlighting, which was great. Bruce Willis had just done Die Hard. I'm actually calling you from Century City right now. And he just did the whole movie around the Fox Tower, and he was white hot, and he couldn't have been a nicer guy to the staff. So that was a real fun experience. And working with Sybil Shepherd, it was great. Most TV scripts you write at about that time were roughly 1 minute per page. And if you wrote a TV script that was 60 pages long, that might be a little long because you had to cut out stuff for commercials and everybody wouldn't talk so fast and there's a lot of action. But at Moonlighting, you could write an 80 or 90 page script and they would look at you and go, oh, well, that's not a bad first draft. And so then my first draft, I think, for my first script was about 92 pages long. And it ultimately got cut down to about 80. But that was way beyond most TV scripts at the time. But Bruce and Sybil could just, rip through this stuff. And they were great. And then after that, Quantum Leap. And that was a lot of fun. I sat in a meeting with Don Belisario. I was sitting in his office at Universal. We talked and talked and talked. He came out of advertising. I'd been in advertising, so we had some common ground there to talk about like that. And this was in the afternoon, about, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, like that. And at the end of this meeting, he just sort of goes, okay, great. And he leans back in his chair and he shouts off, it was like off camera, shouts off through an open doorway to his long-term secretary, Harriet, and goes, Harriet, give me Gary Hart. Okay, put through Chris Ruppenthal's deal. And I'm like, what? And then he goes, hey, you want to sit in on a story pitch meeting? And I go, sure. And we walk through a doorway, and I walk into our common room where we had a lot of pitch meetings and couch and chairs like that. And I sit down with Deborah Pratt and Paul Brown and me. And, a minute later, some poor guy walks in to pitch us stories, and he's pitching to me like I've been on staff for 6 months or something. And I'm like going, yeah, good. That sounds interesting. Yeah. So that was my start on Quantum Leap. And I have to say, Quantum Leap was, tons of fun. So.
What was the first story you were involved in any way on Quantum Leap?
The first story I wrote was Good Morning Peoria, which was certainly inspired by Good Morning Vietnam. And it was just a lot of fun to see it all come to life. I mean, the thrilling part to me about television or movie making is, you sort of it's a fantasy world come true. You write stuff down on a page from your computer or whatever, and suddenly 100 people, like shoemakers' elves, except they're far more talented, put it all together, and suddenly you're standing on a set that is, a radio station in Peoria, Illinois, or wherever it may be. And it's hard to capture how much fun and how giddy that can make a person feel. And it was just a pleasure from sort of start to finish working on Quantum Leap and those shows.
Was it your idea to get Chubby Checker?
Yeah, Chubby Checker was great. We thought, who can we get? We went down a list of people. We always did that. What songs could we do? What could we influence and tie in like that? And my God, we were all surprised. Hey, it's really Chubby Checker. So people would come down to the set, and just to stand near the real guy. So yes, Chubby Checker was very nice, and it could have been more fun on that. But it was fun to see Patricia Richardson. She went on to be, a huge sitcom star, and she's like, well, I auditioned for this thing. I don't know if I'm going to get this part, And we're cut to, 5 years later, huge star. But Patricia Richardson, she couldn't have been nicer too.
Could you talk to me a little bit about the feeling of being on staff at Quantum Leap and just the way it was back then, the whole time you were there? Maybe just, again, the feeling and the work situation and what your job entailed? Because I noticed you wore many different hats on Quantum Leap. Yeah,
it was fun. I mean, it was a great time to be in TV back then, particularly at Universal. One reason why is once you reached a certain level, like a producer level or something, you got your own secretary. So everybody had a lot of us all had their own secretaries to do the work. Don and the company would spring for fruit bowls everywhere. So there's always fresh fruit around to eat. And so you had these nice offices. I had a huge office, just even starting out at Quantum Leap, I had a big office that was, big enough to have, couches and chairs and this and that and a desk. And there was about 5 of us on staff originally writing. There's a little bit of fluid change in the first year or so. But, I think when Deborah was writing and I was there and Paul Brown was there and Tommy Thompson was there, it could have been more fun. Other people came, Beverly Bridges and Randy Holland, but it was just, people got along. Every episode was like doing a feature film, a short movie, So it was sort of like, what fun thing could you dream up that you want to do? And we could almost always do it. You had to sell Don on it, but he was very open to all sorts of different ideas, And I thought to say, here's a difference I felt with Quantum Leap that it's hard to identify and see in other TV shows, I think, sometimes or oftentimes, which was I felt Don really wanted them all to have a theme and or a message in them, and to stand for something. And I think very early on he was, strong for women's rights and how women should be treated, as equals, etc. And other things, whether or racial things or gay things. I mean, he was not afraid to take on these topics, and neither was Scott the actor. I mean, some shows actors balk at some things in scripts, and Scott was always game. So that's pretty heady to have a license like that. And Quantum Leap gave it to us, and I will not forget that experience. It's pretty liberating as a writer to be able to do that.
Did a lot of the production staff feel the same way, that they wanted to put messages in there and were okay with doing that, and were pretty much on that side politically, kind of?
Yeah, I think so. I think we were all sort of in sync with that. It just worked out that way. I don't think, Don asked us who we voted for in the last election or anything. And certainly Don would be not afraid to say, well, I don't agree with that, or I disagree with this or whatever. Why would they do that? That's, so there would definitely be back and forth at things, but it was always in service to the story. I think one of the best rules I learned from Don, because you come up with these things when you're cracking stories or facing an issue, which was, he was all for attacking it head on and just calling attention to it and saying, well, I think it's this way, but you think it's that way, or I don't know what the answer is here. What is the answer? And doing that, again, was sort of liberating, because he didn't expect you to always be perfect and to know the answer. Part of the way he wrote, I was listening to part of the interview you did with him, absolutely true. He gets an idea and he would sit down and start writing. And he didn't write an outline like we had to do. He just wrote, and he sort of found his way in his path and sort of found what he was writing about. Or as he said, he would know what the ending is, but he didn't know how he was going to get there initially. Mm-hmm. We had to sort of know where we were going and where we were coming from. But that was the way Don was, but he was always game for it, so supporting us in our ideas, whether they were liberal or sort of conservative, that was fine by him. I think he wanted to have fairness. I think that was a key thing for Don.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that came out in the show, too.
Yeah.
What was the writing process for you like on the shows you did write?
Well, you pitch an idea or you have some idea about doing something like Good Morning Peoria or whatever, and then they'd say, yeah, great, go ahead. And then you would sit down and try to write an outline. And that might take you several days. It might take you a week to write an outline. And then you would turn in the outline or show it to everybody else, and we'd all sit down and look at the outline on that you had written and give notes, or I don't know about this part in Act 2 or this part in Act 3. What if you did this and that? You might revise it. There might be multiple revisions. There might not. And then off you went, and you just wrote as fast as you could. Technically you have 2 weeks to write a script per the Writers Guild. But sometimes you just have to write them faster, or sometimes you get more time because the script is not needed right away. Because you've all set up a schedule, like, your script is next, and then it's Tommy, and then Paul and Deborah, and then Paul again, and then you, and whatever. So things went like that with Quantum Leap. And then you write it and turn it a draft, and you get Don notes, and everybody else gives you notes on it like that, and you revise it again and again and again. And, if you ever look at the cover of a script, a production draft, it goes through multiple changes. Sometimes there's only one page is changed. Sometimes it's 10 pages are changed. And then you roll off into production, but at least they have a script to work with once you've written it. So locations can start scouting, casting can get to work, costumes know what to do, all that stuff. That's how it worked.
How collaborative was the writing process? Like, if you were writing a script and other people, would they just give you ideas that might work out in the script or not?
Sometimes, yes, absolutely. So you come in, you sit down at lunch, or you go out to lunch, you sit at a table, you sit at the couch, and you go, I don't know what to do with this act here. Act 3 is driving me crazy right now. And so they say, well, what if you did this, or Sam's do that? Where in my script, I'm having him do that, so why don't you try this? So there definitely was some collaboration, and sometimes rewriting. You have some freelance scripts, and some scripts like that. I might be given the job to rewrite it, or Paul might, or Tommy might, or whatever. It just all goes around that way. But yeah, definitely you share ideas and kick around and think about what am I going to do. And occasionally you get a script. It was not so much usually internally. But one of the freelance scripts, every once in a while, would just say, wow, this needs a total rewrite, and we don't have a lot of time. And we would break it up into acts, and somebody would take Act 1, somebody else would take Act 2, 3, and 4, something like that, and put it all together, and away we would go.
With the way the credits work, sometimes you see written by, sometimes you see story by, sometimes you see teleplay. What's the difference between all of those?
Well, that's all per the Writers Guild. There are clear-cut Writers Guild rules on that. A lot of times back then, if you did like a freelance script, and at the time, I haven't checked recently on the Writers Guild minimum basic agreement and rules of contract, but you either had to, if you had like an order of 13 episodes or 22, you had to do like 2 or 3 freelance scripts, or you had to take a certain number of freelance pitches. And then you could still write those scripts, all the scripts on staff. But let's say you had a freelance script, and you weren't limited to 3. You could do, all of them if you wanted to. But if you had a freelancer come in and write a script and it didn't turn out, then you might say, we bought this pitch from them, usually with an option. So, Frank and Sally come in and pitch us an idea that Universal and Quantum Leap buys it, story with an option for teleplay. So let's say we cut them off after story, like they've got a good idea. It's about a circus or whatever it is. And you know what? Their outline just isn't making it. They're too much. They can't crack it. So we love the circus idea. So what we'll do is we pay them for the story. We'll cut them off here. They'll get story by credit. We will now create an outline ourselves and we'll write it. And then we'll get teleplay credit, whoever wrote it. So that type of stuff. So that could be a way you could have different names on the credits there. And written by is we just did everything. If I wrote the story and teleplay, they just put it like written by Chris Ruppenthal. And that covers all bases right there.
Did you ever have any ideas for a Quantum Leap story that didn't go through or it just didn't get made?
I'm sure I had thousands of fabulous ideas that didn't get made. Unfortunately, I can't remember any of them right now about which ideas I might like to have done. I think, though they started changing rules towards the very end, every once in a while, everybody wanted to do something that might have gone past Sam's lifespan, which was sort of the theoretical boundaries of Quantum Leap, of the episode timeline. But, you always wanted to do the World War II one or something, or whatever it might have been, the Civil War one. And ultimately, Don changed the rules towards the very end. But those are our main things. But no, I would say there was nothing that really stuck in my mind that we wanted to do, unless it was sort of like, a beach party movie or an underwater movie or something, that wasn't going to happen on Quantum Leap. We had a good budget, but there are certain things that, we just couldn't afford to do, or Don was just like, nah, it's just too wacky or something.
If it's okay, I'd like to go through the episode you're credited as writing, and just tell me what you remember about them, and
Sure.
the experience of them. We already talked about Good Morning Peoria, so we'll go with Animal Frat.
Well, Animal Frat was, again, of course, inspired by Animal House. The funniest thing about that one was, which has nothing to do with the actual writing of it, but they were shooting the big scene where they're inside the fraternity and people are diving into like this little pool and stuff like that. And I'm in my office at Universal, and the reason I remember this is because you'll be self-explanatory in a second. But I happen to often wear a pair of white buck shoes, white suede shoes. Okay, so that was sort of a trademark. So I'm sitting in my office writing like this, and I get this call, an urgent call from the set, which says, "You've got to come to the set immediately. We've got a huge problem. Run down here right now." We're on the stage. So I'm like, oh my God. So I drop everything and I rush down to the stage like that, and I come through the doors and I'm grabbed. And they basically, like being in a mosh pit, they carry me over their heads and throw me into this huge pool of water there. And everyone had a big laugh about that. Because I'm completely soaked and, drenching like that and everything like that. But that was it. But the good thing was, it was all good-natured stuff. It was really like a family. A little sidebar there. I don't know if anybody told you this. Dean Stockwell was a big golfer, was interested in golfing, and had a birthday. So it was his birthday or something. They were going to celebrate like that. And what they did was they took his car without his knowledge, transportation guys. They drove it onto a stage. It was a Cadillac, I believe, and they filled it with golf balls. So then they brought Dean there, like, open the door, 8 gazillion golf balls pour out for Dean Stockwell. So anyway, that's a funny thing. But yeah, Animal Frat was a lot of fun to do.
Freedom
was great. I loved doing that one because about American Indians, and I wanted to have some depth to it where Sam in various episodes had to kill people in his personas of other lives. And I always like this sort of supernatural subtext sometimes at Quantum Leap. So when they have the horse there, and they're sort of putting on the war paint, and they're putting on handprints on the horse's flank, which stands for how many people you've killed, he puts on like 2, and the Indian guy waits there, and then he puts on the 3rd one. And it's like he knows, and like, how does he know this about this guy and everything else like that? I like that spooky moment. I also loved it that, it turned out, and that's why I set the date in a certain way, that the Cowboys had played the Redskins in football. So that was a great joke, I thought, to work in, where, he says he loves it when the Redskins beat the Cowboys. And it was fun shooting that episode. I think Dean had just won the Golden Globe, like the night before when we were shooting part of this scene, and we were up in the mountains, and there was still snow there, and they decided to use all this snow. That was something we made or planned. It had snowed, and there was snow in the mountains. It's like, hey, we're going to just go with it and shoot that stuff. And so that was literally a cool aspect of doing Freedom. And the fact that he sort of dies crossing the river, I wrote that script, and there were almost no changes in it from Don, which is very rare. Not that he made huge changes and everything, but almost every script needs a change. But that one went through with virtually no changes. Only time in my life of writing that ever happened. but I was very proud and pleased about that movie. That episode, I should call it. It felt like a movie, but yeah.
You spoke about those moments in that episode, and there are several where you're kind of questioning whether the grandfather sees it as his grandson, sees the other character as his grandson, or as Sam. What was your intention when writing that?
Well, my intention was to have that ambiguity, because we did it that way in Boogeyman too a little bit, where at times people seem to sense that Sam is not Sam or not the person who's in front of them. And that was my intention. Is it a cliche to say, American Indians are mystical and more in touch with this stuff? In some ways, yes, but hopefully I played that cliche down. Because when I worked on another show called Harts of the West, we were working with this gentleman who was an American Indian, and it was great. And this happened when they were doing the pilot, which was before I was on Hearts of the West. But Bob Maloney, who ran the show and created it, was telling me that this guy normally works as an accountant. He's a part-time actor, And he's standing alone out in the bluffs in the desert where they're shooting this thing. And Maloney walks up to him and goes, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm calling the Eagles." And you can imagine there's like this pause, like you're thinking, yeah, really? And Maloney swears. Then an eagle flew up overhead.
Wow.
And it's like this guy was we used it in Hearts of the West to be sort of shamanistic, and in real life he was sort of shamanistic. So that type of stuff is a flavor, a tone I wanted to play in Freedom.
One Strobe Over the Line.
One Strobe Over the Line was great, dealing with sort of anorexia, eating disorders, pill addictions. Marjorie, who played the actress, was great. We're shooting around there. We went to go out and look because there's a lion in it. We went out way out to me, which was then like you need a passport to go to Calabasas or something out here. And this guy had a private, basically, zoo where he trained animals. And his girlfriend looked a lot like Marjorie, so the girlfriend was going to double for the stunts with the lion and everything like that. But he was showing us all these animals, and we got to go in the cage and pet the lion, the big lion, and pet his mane, which was cool. And then he takes the lion out to show how well he can control him. And we're all standing on this dirt road outside his compound, and he walks, 100 yards away with this lion, and he comes back to us, and his partner is holding the lion, I guess it was, and they let the lion off the leash, and it starts running towards us, and we're all going, "Hey, that's cool! I mean, a lion, it's running!" And then we all think, "Wait a minute, that's a lion running at us!" And he just gave hand signals, and the lion stopped, But for that split second there, you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, this thing would kill us." So they shoot the movie. Zinberg is directing, doing a great job as usual. And I get this report when they come back in. They go, people are sort of like, "Oh my God, it was unbelievable. You couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable." And we're like, "Well, what?" And they'd been shooting a scene from the show where Marjorie runs away and the lion chases after her. And they had trained the lion to knock down the stunt woman, blah, 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 blah. Well, hey, it's a wild animal. You're out in the wild. And the stunt woman went running away, and the lion took off much faster and much more determined than anybody had anticipated. And there was this moment where it knocked her down, and they thought, "Oh my God, it's going to bite her." And it didn't, and it all resolved safely and calmly. But it was one of those things where, wow, it could have been a disaster. Instead, it turned out to be fine. It was one of those weird things that happened in One Strobe Over the Line.
If things like that happen while filming, and you were the one that came up with the idea, is there such a thing as like writer's guilt?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I would have felt horrible if something horrible had happened, It makes you think, at least it makes me think, the next time I write a scene, could something bad happen here? I mean, how do we keep everybody safe, you know? There were rules back then in standards and practices, like you couldn't point guns at people's heads, you know? They just didn't want that. It was too dangerous. I think there's some good reasons for that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you know, you don't want to play around with it. You know, an actor a few years after that, I think his name is John Eric Hexum, was playing around on the set with a gun loaded with blanks, and he shot himself in the head, you know, playing around, it's a blank, and he killed himself.
Yes, and they really will kill you.
Yeah.
I think I saw a video one time of the people that control the arms. They shoot off at a watermelon every day in front of the actors to show them how dangerous it is.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, because you don't want stuff like that to happen. If people don't know, they don't know, you know.
No, they don't. I think they were always super safety conscious on Quantum Leap sets, actually on pretty much on every set I've been on, fortunately. And Scott and Dean were very safety conscious about not only themselves, but about other actors who were working with them, you know. They were very concerned and generous about that. So I think we had a very good team, and everything worked out well.
I think it's great now that they can just put the muzzle flashes in and post, and you don't even have to worry about blanks.
Yeah, that's true.
So that makes it even safer. You mentioned Marjorie Monahan, and Susan Anton was also in that episode. What involvement does the writer have in approving or supervising the casting of that?
You know, it depends on the level you are in the writing world. Are you a story editor, or are you a supervising producer or co-executive producer or whatever? Have some say-so. Deborah Pratt had a great eye for acting because she was an actress herself. So she was good at saying, oh, you know what, I think this person can give us the depth we really need. Yes, X may look better or seem more what you wrote, but I think this other person will deliver exactly what we want. And you go back and forth, and sometimes there's a tie, and sometimes it's a toss-up, and the head guy, Don, will say, oh, I like this person, but I'll go with what you want, or whatever. Usually it was pretty clear-cut when acting came about and actresses were being chosen. Not always, but often. You just said, wow, this person's got it, you know. So I would say it was sort of a democracy, or there's more of a first among equals, if you want to say, to that process. And of course, the casting director has a huge input too. He or she may say, wow, I know her work or his work, and they really did a fabulous job in this thing. So it was sort of a group consensus, you know.
Very cool. Moving on to the episode that you were actually in, you made a little appearance as the Leap B, as Joshua Ray, the Boogeyman.
Yeah. Well, the Boogeyman, it sort of became like Hamlet.
Yes.
In this, I remember the first Quantum Leap convention, it was like, don't say its name out loud, you know? And when we aired the episode, shortly thereafter, we started getting some fan mail. And the fan mail said, the Boogeyman started and my DVD player broke. The Boogeyman started and it was halfway through and the TV broke. And we got multiple ones like that. And so it became sort of legendary. And when I was shooting this movie, I keep saying movie, Joe Napolitano was directing, who is A, a friend of mine, and B, we became friends because we met on Quantum Leap when he was directing, and he's a terrific director. So we're doing this, and Joe and I are out scouting on location. We're scouting this house not too far from Universal. And, you know, in the script there's a goat, and, you know, are there ghosts? Is it poltergeist? What's going on? We don't know, blah, blah, blah. We're out walking around. We're looking at this house. It's pretty cool. This is neat, this and that. And location guy comes from having been around back in the house, and he goes, well, you know, there's a goat back there. And we go, no, there's not. And he goes, no, there's a goat back there. And there really was a goat there. So that sort of weirded us out. And then another guy comes out and goes, well, you know the history of this house, don't you? It's haunted. And again, we're thinking like they're pulling our leg. And they go, no, seriously, it's haunted. There's a ghost in this house. So Joe and I just like look at each other like going, he's like, you kidding me? You know? So that was just a funny little bit of the boogeyman thing. But after that aired, people really didn't want to say its name. They would come up and talk all about it, but it was like you just can't say its name because it caused weird things to happen in their lives. So it was a lot of fun to do. And at one time, I remember the spinning scene at the very end where Sam and the devil are sort of spinning around and the room is spinning behind them. We built this turntable and we had to put them on it in a camera and we had to put the goat on it, this and that. And I remember it's late at night, it's like about midnight and we're shooting and they're setting it up to tether this poor goat to this thing and make sure it's safe and not harmed. And Joe and I are taking a break and we're walking around and we look at each other and we go, can you believe how much fun this is? I mean, like we're about to put a goat on a turntable and film this, and they're paying us money to do it, So that was a fun episode.
That was a funny part of the episode for me. I don't know if it was meant to be funny, but when it turns to a goat, because it cycles through the characters in the episode, and then you have the goat, and I just laugh every time. I just think it's funny.
Good. Yeah, and I don't know how many people catch this or not. Maybe most people do. But one of the things that we did with Dean was we tried to put these little curls in his head or like horns.
Especially in the library, you can tell in that scene.
Right. So, and sometimes it's more apparent than others. And some people pick up on it instantly, and other people, don't go until the end. They go, "Oh yeah." So that was fun. I'll tell you another funny little Quantum Leap thing, which is, and I didn't even know about it. This is how crews work. Michael Watkins, who was the DP and again fabulous and became a great director, they had a crew tradition where I think in every episode, at least while I was there, there's a hockey puck hidden somewhere on the set.
Wow.
It didn't matter what time period it was, and I would have to go back with like a magnifying glass and look at every episode. But I remember being on the set one time looking at it and going, why is this hockey puck here? And they go, well, it's in every episode, And there's little inside jokes. You can't tell this. The last one I did, I think, was The Curse of Ptah-hotep. Mm-hmm. And so they build this inside of an Egyptian tomb, and there's all these hieroglyphs on the walls and little figures, this and that. But if you could look up really close to them, like some of the little pharaohs walking and the hieroglyphs are like smoking cigarettes and things like that. Those little jokes that would never be picked up normally on camera, but sort of amusing for the crew to see. So
a lot more of those things are coming through now that there are episodes that are in high def. So
yes, that's true. That's true. We got to be careful about what we put on the walls now.
I wanted to ask you about Boogeyman. There's competing theories. There's a theory that Sam's in a time loop. There's a theory that it really did happen, and there's also a theory that the whole thing was a dream. Now, you're the writer of this episode. Can you definitively tell us what was going on in this episode?
No, I can't tell you. I have to make you, feel horrible and torture you. Yeah, no, again, that was intentionally ambiguous there. What was I really thinking? I really think it happened. I won't torture you any longer.
Okay.
No, in my world, in my mind view, it happened, and yet it got erased in a sense because it's time travel and the devil and supernatural stuff.
So whoever was leaping Sam around just reset the time back to the original time when it struck midnight, kind of. Right.
Now, if you ask Don about this again, he might say, no, it wasn't that at all, and maybe I'm not remembering it correctly like that. It's a little bit, I know it had a little bit of a Wizard of Oz feeling when that happened. But again, it was sort of that built-in ambiguity, which horror novels and spooky things like that, lend themselves to. So it was just to try to make it a head-scratcher,
Success.
Thank you.
Moving on to another fan favorite, Glitter Rock.
Glitter Rock was fun, just because, Kiss was such a huge hit. And before I ever went on Quantum Leap, I had been at home watching TV, and I, for some reason, was flipping around and watched the Tony Awards. And they had an excerpt from a Broadway musical that was great, and there was this young guy in this scene. I don't know if it was I don't know if it was on the 20th Century or not, was the musical or not, but he was terrific. He was singing and he had presents and everything else like that. And then, who do I find out that was later on? Scott Bakula. And so Scott can sing, you know, and he can certainly act. So I thought, well, let's have some fun with that and put him in Glitter Rock, you know. What could be more disorienting than to leap into a band in front of, 50,000 people or whatever and dressed in makeup like that? So that was just a fun episode pretty much from start to finish.
You wrote the episode. Did you also write the lyrics to the songs in the episode?
Yes, I did. Yeah, Fate's Wide Wheel and all that type of stuff. Yes,
Rock the Redhead.
Yeah, I can still remember some of the lyrics to them, but yeah, I wrote the songs to that one. And in fact, it got me to join BMI, which is the music industry, you know. And so every once in a while I get a check because they played Glitter Rock in Iceland or something. And
that was my next question, if you still got paid for the writing those songs.
yes, BMI, God bless them, keeps very good track of this stuff. And though the checks are now minuscule, they still come. It's fun, And somewhere out there's like, Quantum Leap DVDs too somewhere. But yeah, Glitter Rock was a lot of fun to write a song, or songs, I should say.
Do you think that's why sometimes they leave some of these episodes out of, say, Netflix or Hulu because of the music rights?
I don't know. I would have thought no, that's not why, because I would have thought the music rights would have been taken care of originally by whoever originally created the show and aired it. But I could be wrong, because these things are Byzantine in their execution about who pays what when. But I sort of doubt it. I think they've probably been covered by all that stuff when they bought the rights to the whole series or whatever episodes you're doing.
Yeah, they did a lot of music replacement on the U.S. DVDs.
Yeah, it may be. It may be. I mean, that's a realm I'm not familiar with. So.
How about Hurricane?
Hurricane was fun because I grew up in the land of hurricanes and lived through a bunch of them. Part of the characters, the older couple, were modeled after my grandparents. And the greatest pleasure I got from that was I got a call from a cousin of my mom saying afterwards, "Oh, you put them in there." They recognized them instantly, So I thought, all right, I captured them. So that was a fun thing to do. And I just liked Hurricanes because sometimes you do shows like that. It has a personal angle to it, which makes it easier to write. But the other thing is, it's like, well, how can we do a hurricane? Can we do a hurricane? Can we put water inside on the set and do this and that? You try to do something that you haven't done before. And that was part of the impetus for doing Hurricane, which was so they built this set and then they had to build like a little pool that went around the outside of the exterior of the set, which was all on a sound stage. And, had all this water pouring down in it and had to be caught in this little pool, which they had made, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of a technical whiz-bang thing. And that was just fun to watch them construct it.
Episodes like that, how many times did they get the finished product as close to what you pictured in your head when you were writing it?
Well, on Quantum Leap, very many times. 95% of the time. I mean, I would say almost every episode was as I imagined it or better, which is the joy of working with very talented people. The actors bring a nuance to it or a depth to it that's better than what you even wrote. Even as a writer with an ego, it's like, whoa, that was great, And then the art direction and the camera people and the DP and props and, production design, all these people, locations, costumes, Jean-Pierre Dorliac doing the costumes and stuff. Wow. I mean, they tell personalities and tell you stuff about a story that you don't even put in there on the page, and they expand and make better. So I would say I was very fortunate that in Quantum Leap, every episode, I never watched an episode that was mine or almost anybody else's that I thought, wow, they missed it. That wasn't right. Like never.
Did they get it better sometimes?
Definitely. Look, when I originally wrote Freedom, I didn't think there was going to be snow on the mountainside. And that just made it even better, Them all sort of bundled up and sort of mountain man stuff in the snow. Wow. Capitalizing on a fluke like that, that was great.
Yeah, that makes it better. It really does.
Yeah.
The Last Gunfighter.
Wow. The Last Gunfighter, I don't have a whole lot of different memories about that one, honestly. I'm going to draw a blank on that one.
Okay.
Other than to say I remember writing it. But I like Westerns, I can tell you that. So I'm always looking for an opportunity to do a Western. I just think they're a great genre, and I'm very happy like Quentin Tarantino is doing a Western again.
Yeah, well, that was definitely a good way to get Sam into a Western. Have it.
Yeah.
I had a question about the ending of that episode. Did the Pat Knight character played by John Anderson, did he throw that duel at the end for Sam's character? I kind of felt that he was doing it to just make his friend look better.
Yeah. I'm getting a vague Quantum Leap moment here. Yes, I think you're right in that assumption, because I'm inspired when you talked about this. It reminds me of first The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and then also Jimmy Cagney. I can't remember the movie, whether it's White Heat or not, where he's about to go to the electric chair, and he's a tough guy, and yet because Patrick O'Brien, the priest, talks to him and says, "Do something for the kids," he starts to act like he's scared and afraid to go to the electric chair. So the kids will, gee, this tough guy cracked, and maybe being a criminal is not such a good thing. It's sort of a noble act, and I think that was the subtext I was going for.
How inspired is your writing by other things you've seen, or other movies or films or TV shows that you liked and thought, maybe I could use that here?
Yeah, often very inspired. It's almost impossible as a writer to divorce yourself from everything else, because you're watching a million TV shows or movies on your own, or you've read a million plays. If you read enough Shakespeare plays, you'll see them all on TV, in some guise or another of the plot. And he borrowed from the Italians. So there's no end to borrowing or homage. Nobody, at least on the shows I worked on, wanted to do direct copies unless it was super intentional, and then it was obvious that you were doing a copy. But otherwise, you would try to use it as a foundation and then take a twist on it to make it your own, and make it different. So it's inspired. I think a lot of it is also inspired just by everybody's personal life, or the lives of the writers around the table, or people you draw on them. And you say, oh, well, this friend of mine told me this story, this happened to him, and wow, that'd be good to put in here. So that's what we do. I
liked in your writing for Quantum Leap that when something was obviously inspired by something, you called it out, like, say, Good Morning Peoria you mentioned the movie Good Morning Vietnam in the script, and also in Roberto, you mentioned Geraldo in it. Does that make it okay then?
I think it does in a way, yes. In my universe, it does, because you're not trying to pull a fast one over the audience.
Right.
You're giving a tip of the hat to it, and it's sort of also a shorthand, sort of a form of writer's shorthand that people know. Then I know how this is going to go, or how it should go, and then you can play on that expectation and twist it and surprise them. But yes, I think it's good to give an acknowledgement of that, and I see that occasionally in current shows now.
I think you can't help but mention it, because the characters usually are in the same universe we are, and we're aware of what we're seeing too. So
right, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about Roberto. Tell me about that.
Well, that was just fun. Geraldo Rivera was such an outrageous character at his peak that we thought, let's do this. Let's have Sam be like Geraldo Rivera, and that was just the starting point of it all, really. And everybody thought, that would be a fun thing to do. And we did the episode. I can't even remember how the plot ended in Roberto.
Something to do with a inhaler was poisoned, so the girl would have died from asthma, but by actual poison.
Right. I'm more clever than I remember.
And you had Sam spray what the killer thought was poison in his face, so he kind of admitted that he knew what was going on.
Right, yeah. Here's an interesting comparison. So Sam does a comeuppance there that way. He sort of hoists the villain by his own petard, as Shakespeare might say. And in Moonlighting, it was the exact opposite. If you ever watched old Moonlightings, particularly in the last season when we were there, they didn't want the crime to be solved so much by facts, like, this proves that the blood was here, was on your shirt, we did the DNA testing, okay? They wanted emotional clues and tricks and traps so that emotionally, psychologically, the bad guy would give themselves away. And about half the time we would joke about this in Moonlighting, Bruce or Sybil would say something like that, accusing him of this, and then usually the bad guy or bad woman chokes and runs. So that's an admission of guilt by fleeing, okay? But if they had just said, no, that's not true, and stood there, the episode would have been dead, you know? It just would have ended, you know? Mm-hmm. But that was sort of the fun of Moonlighting, was you went emotionally rather than with facts.
That's that whole who told you just did thing.
Right.
I loved Moonlighting. I grew up on Moonlighting. Very big fan. It was a great show. Was it really as magical being there as watching it on TV? I heard some things about behind the scenes. Maybe they weren't and everybody was getting along.
Well, in Moonlighting, yeah, I mean, yes and no. There were moments, there were some rough patches. I won't go into gross, gory details as much as you want them. Mm-hmm. But they all got smoothed over. Mm. Again, it was a very fun staff. That last year, Chick Hegley was running it. Carrie Aaron was on there with me and with Jim Kramer and Jerry Stahl and Barbara Hall, who's runs Madam Secretary. And everybody's very talented. And again, it was sort of a fun staff to be on. You know, definitely everybody had their own personalities, and it's not like we all worked together. I wrote some scripts with Jim, and that was fun. But that was a really good time for me anyway. I really enjoyed that last season. I was sorry it didn't go another 5 years.
I was young, but I remember crying because it was over.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to write any of those things that I think it was Elise Beasley said when she picked up the phone?
I think I had to have written them because we didn't really parcel things out. You know, you wrote your own scripts, unless there was some reason you teamed up like Jim and I did. So yeah, we wrote everything. You would write all the words. Now that isn't to say that, particularly since I was lowly writer back then, it might not have been every word I ever wrote, or Chick might have rewritten it, or somebody else might have rewritten it. Roger Director was doing some consulting and writing for us, so he could have rewritten Alice's Elise Beasley's stuff. But pretty much what you wrote went in, and then you knew it was going to get rewritten, so that was it.
Very fun to watch. I recommend it to anybody who hasn't seen Moonlighting to just marathon the whole thing. It's a great show.
Oh, yeah. And Curtis Armstrong.
Oh, yeah.
Fun guy there.
The Curse of Ptah-hotep.
Yes. Well, I'm a big archaeology buff, and I love Egyptian stuff, and I don't know how much you follow it, but like right now they even think, as of today, that there may be a hidden doorway in Tutankhamun's tomb.
I saw something about temperature differences they recently found.
Yeah, that's on the exterior of the Great Pyramid. Mm-hmm. But in King Tut's tomb, they did an examination, and part of it was from, I think, 3D scanning, where they're doing like laser 3D scanning of monuments in case they ever get torn down or blown up.
It's good that they're doing that.
Yeah, so they can recreate them, at least digitally. Mm-hmm. And I've forgotten who it was. I can't remember if it was a French archaeologist or an Egyptian one. But there seem to be some variations that could be a doorway that has been plastered over, which would not be unusual to do. And it could be a spirit doorway. And they also think that the tomb that Tut was in seems small for a pharaoh. So there's a theory that if this is a door, it may lead to a much larger tomb, which might be for a queen, which would be what the original tomb was all built for. So they're taking their time about whether they're going to tear into this wall because they got to, cut through real hieroglyphs and stuff. So that type of stuff just fascinates me. And so mummies and the pharaoh and everything else, and the mummy's curse and playing off of that, again, that sort of supernatural thing, and all those rumors about Howard Carter being cursed and the people dying who discovered King Tut, that all went into the pleasure of thinking up and then writing about Ptah-hotep. And it was at the very end, this is a Don thing, which everybody loved when they watched it, and because he wanted to have, somebody standing at the end, and then the mummy's hand comes up and grabs this guy on the shoulder. Mm-hmm. And we're all like, what? The mummy? Come on, really? Yeah, it'll be fun. And so we did it, and it was fun.
Fun stuff like that. Do you have to come up with an alternate reason to why it happened or could have happened, or is it just, it's fun?
Just fun.
Cool.
First X-Files episode I wrote, Morgan and Wong, I had written some scene where, like some character or something exits, screen right or something like that. And they said, oh no, and then he comes back in on screen left. And I go, well how did they get over there? They go, don't worry, just be really cool. It's really scary. And they were into that type of stuff, and they were really excellent at it, and they were right. It was really scary. So sometimes you just did it that way,
It is entertainment after all. That's the most important part.
That, you know what? You got to remember that. That's the bottom line. We're not doing documentaries.
Which a lot of times are entertainment as well.
They are entertaining. There's some great documentaries, but I'm hired to do the made-up ones.
The episode of Quantum Leap you directed, Southern Comforts.
Oh, that was fun. I think that was Tommy Thompson's script, which is a fun script to do. I mean, you get inspired by things where he worked for Burt Reynolds early in his career, as I remember him saying in his interview, too. And Burt Reynolds had been in Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, like the movie version. And so there was a setting, a whorehouse, and that was it. That's the inspiration. And Tommy would have to give you the details on what else made him do it. It was fun to direct, abject pleasure mixed with abject terror throughout. I couldn't have gotten through it without the crew, and particularly Michael Watkins. And I remember one day I'm on the set, I don't know, 3 or 4 days in, I'm not sleeping a whole lot because I'm just so anxious about it and planning things, And we get to a scene, and my agents are there. My agents come down, I forgot who else was there. I think maybe my wife was there to see me directing a big deal thing, okay? And just before they walk in on the stage, we're about to go to lunch, and Scott is like, I don't know about this scene. I just wish we could do something different here, something better, what if they, and it all blew up right there at that moment. Not in a bad way, but like, oh my God, we're going to change the script right now. And so we said, okay, we're going to go to lunch early. And we broke early for lunch, and everybody went away, except for like me, Scott, and other people in the scene, but mainly me and Scott and like a script supervisor to take notes. And we basically rewrote this scene, this big scene, which was like the climax, and just wrote dialogue and made up dialogue and rough blocking and how we were going to do this. And then everybody came back from lunch, and it was like, okay, let's shoot it. And it was sort of like I said, like, welcome to Quantum Leap Improv. Here we go. And thank God for Scott and Dean and everybody else, because they could do it and they pulled it all off. So that was a lot of fun.
Was Tommy Thompson okay with that?
Yeah, I think Tommy was. I mean, I'm trying to remember. He probably was there too on the set because it was his script. But, there wasn't a choice. I mean, Scott and Dean would break their backs for the show. So we were all too willing to break our backs for them, Very early on when I was on Quantum Leap, we'd be moving from one part of the set to another, or lighting a different part of a set, or going over here and that. And, Scott would want to move lights and move sandbags, and people would have to say, hey, Scott, don't do that. You don't have to do that, but he was just so helpful and such a nice guy, So how can you not like people like that and want to help them out if they ask you for something?
From what I hear, he's still doing that today.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that, I'm glad that a good guy hasn't changed. He's still a good guy. But yeah, so Southern Comforts was fun. The actresses I worked with were all great. It was fun to see some of them show up in other shows and movies and other episodes of other shows afterwards, on other series.
Okay, so from directing Tommy Thompson's script, Southern Comforts, what was it like having Scott Bakula direct Roberto?
An actor directing himself, I always think is A, excellent, and B, dangerous, because I just think you're going to wear yourself out. Directing is so demanding, and as an actor, at least what I have observed, not having been a series regular myself, you don't have 100 people coming up to you seemingly every minute asking you for a decision. Whereas in directing, that can't be the case. They'll just keep going, oh, what about this? And for next thing, tomorrow, do you want the blue dress or the red dress? And what about that? You know what? I don't know. We have to cut 4 pages from this because we're running long. And all those things. So great. He's an actor, so he can really give you an insight into performance and everything else. And he certainly is smart and certainly picked up, wherever he picked it all up from just acting or whatever else, anything else about directing or camera and the technical stuff. And he has a great support staff there with him, with Watkins and everybody else around. So it worked out fine. I don't know how he slept. I don't know why he wasn't exhausted and in a coma.
Because he was still in every scene.
Yeah, but, he did it. So my hat's off to anybody who does that, who directs themselves and acts in something,
Yeah, most actors, if they're directing an episode, their character has the week off almost.
Yeah, you're not like the lead in every other scene or every scene,
A couple fun things before we talk about the X-Files. You wrote the last episode of Max Headroom.
Well, yeah. Are you talking about Baby Grow Bags, that episode?
Yes.
Yeah. And you know what? I've never seen the final cut of that, or a cut of it. Max Headroom was again a fun, cutting-edge thing to do. The amazing thing about Max Headroom was they were used to shooting longer stuff, the guys who created it and started and ran it. So episodes would come in at 75 minutes long.
Oh, wow.
Had to cut it all out. And then people would go, it doesn't make sense. And go, well, we had to cut out 20 minutes. And they slowly got that under control, sort of. But when they did focus groups on Max Headroom, which I loved, they would say, what do people love about Max Headroom? Oh, it's sort of this post-apocalyptic world. Corporations sort of run things. Everything isn't spelled out. It's sort of in the middle. You jump in the middle of stories, it seems like sometimes, or you have to make these leaps of, thinking, and sort of weird. Okay, so what do people hate about Max Headroom? Oh, it's set in a post-apocalyptic world. Corporations run everything. You jump in the middle, It was that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So what do? You just do the show you want to do as long as the network will let you. Again, it was fun. Baby Grow Bags that's the science side of me, which I liked on Outer Limits, which was fun to do on Max Headroom, which was the idea that, just growing people are growing things, It's eerie and creepy and entertaining. So that was a fun episode. But like I say, I've never seen the final cut of that.
It's on DVD. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go out and spring for it.
You would think they would send you one.
Yeah, you think so, right? Where are they now? In fact, the funniest thing, I was watching Supergirl just the other night, and they had that character, the villain, Live Wire, a woman, DJ, who gets hit by lightning, transmitted. Lightning hits Supergirl, which hits this woman, and she becomes Live Wire, and she can turn herself into electricity and put herself through every circuit, every plug, everything like that. And she appears on all these screens behind Callista Flockhart's desk in her office there. But it's like Max Headroom. She sort of stutters for a second and sort of jumps around and twitches, and there's sort of slight glitches. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, well, that's Max Headroom. That,
Instantly recognizable, like in that scene from Back to the Future 2, where they have Ronald Reagan and Michael Jackson as Max Headroom.
Yeah. I mean, there are just some things, at least to me, are iconic. And that was one of them. Was Max Headroom, which I loved, and whatever. And Charlie Rocket was a blast. He was a fun guy to talk to. So,
when you were given that script, did you know it was going to be the series finale, or just thought it was a season finale?
No, I really didn't. I just thought it was a script that I was writing for Max Headroom as best as I could, and and I hope some of my words made it to the screen. It was so exciting just to be on that show. That I had no idea if it was going to. And often that's the case in series. When I did Outer Limits and I did Ripper, they didn't know if that was going to be the 100th episode or not. They thought it might be, it might not be, and I certainly didn't plan for it to be the 100th episode, but they positioned it to be a potential as like the one they would put the big push behind for the 100th episode. They were considering it, and I think, I can't remember the name of the episode, Sam Egan's script, where they went back in time to the concentration camp. That became the 100th episode, and that was a terrific script and a terrific episode.
What's it like to work on a show like The Outer Limits that's like so iconic like that?
Well, the great thing about the Outer Limits was it was like Quantum Leap is an anthology. Every week was different, except this one there was almost no constraint except for your imagination and what the budget was. And my favorite thing about that was, particularly in Outer Limits, was the fun for me as a writer is to crack puzzles or to try to do the impossible. And so in Outer Limits, there was sort of a rule of thumb, like we will never do a period piece because it's too expensive to do. And I thought, you know what, I got to come up with some idea that you just can't say no to. You know, that's a period piece. And it turned out Ripper was that. And they spent extra money on it, and we went to Vancouver Island and shot, and, you know, they couldn't have been more supportive and more into it, and they didn't, you know, pull out the stops on that one. And the other one on Outer Limits, that was sort of like, that was like, I wanted to write a musical, Outer Limits. A musical science fiction show? What is that? And so, you know, I did, which was also an homage to Casablanca.
I'm liking this. I haven't seen that one. I have to go check it out now. This sounds very interesting.
Yeah. And besides, it was Helen Shaver directed it, and she was, I will say, A, a pleasure, B, high maintenance. We got in several, I would say, firm and determined discussions about things on it. But I never saw a director work harder than Helen Shaver. She was terrific. I mean, she was like, go, 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 go. And just, you know, she wanted to get this stuff done, and she did it, and she was terrific that way. And the other thing was Nathan Fillion, who is the star of the episode.
Oh, my goodness. I really have to watch this now.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say, you know, I got him to do Firefly. I would like to take credit for that. I doubt it. That's the reason he got Firefly. But when I saw him and when I saw him acting and I saw stuff going on, I said, you know, this guy can do drama and comedy. He's like, you know, Cary Grant or something. He should be huge. And again, a very nice guy. And another serendipity thing, which was there's at the time, Outer Limits, on not every episode, but some episodes would shoot two versions sometimes of an episode, not a complete episode, but scenes, because there was sometimes like some slight nudity or toplessness or something like that. And there was a sauna scene there, and Nathan goes, well, I've got a tattoo. And we're like, what? Which was like perfect. Like he has like this tattoo on his leg, you know. I know it's in Chinese or something. Right. And we thought, wow, that's pretty cool, you know? That's great for his character. So things like that just pop up that you can't plan. So.
I'm a little bit of a fan. I named my daughter Serenity. So.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think Firefly was a terrific series, and I only weep that it didn't go on longer.
All of us.
Yeah. I'm a huge Firefly.
Very cool. That was a musical?
Well, the musical, it turned out not to be the musical I thought it was going to be. So basically what it turned out to be then was just the female lead singing, and I can't remember her name. I think she was from The Commitments, which was a big movie that had been recently out. And she was British, and she like flew in from England, and like the next day she was in the recording studio having to record the songs. I was like, wow. Again, like another serendipity thing we didn't know. We cast this guy as an actor who was one of the secondary leads, a character sort of helping out with our hero, Nathan. And he's supposed to be playing in a band. So we're going to have a band on stage backing up this woman while she lip syncs to her song. And I was like that. And this guy goes, well, I play the mandolin. We're like, what? He goes, oh, yeah, I play the mandolin. I really play it. So, he's, really playing the mandolin, And it's like, how could you plan that? You couldn't. We couldn't. And it was, again, just, happy coincidence.
You'd have to go through a lot of resumes to find somebody who played the mandolin, probably.
Right. Mandolin, 22 to 24, No.
Did you write those songs again, or were they standards?
I wrote the song, and then it got changed. Richard Lewis wrote the song. He had won an Emmy, I think, the previous year for co-writing, a theme song. So Richard was very into music, and he liked that one, but he thought he had a better idea, and I was going to say, well, okay, go for it, And so, so he wrote that song.
Very cool. Another fun show you were a part of, The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr.
Yeah, that was fun. That's where I first met John McNamara and David Simpkins. Again, both terrific writers. Yeah, I mean, come on. A sort of alien outer space Western?
Mm-hmm.
What could be better than that, So that was just, again, a fun show. And I got to, they weren't afraid to be a little erudite and say, oh, Iphigenia's, or whatever, Socrates. You already start with Socrates. You got to know who Socrates is, and then let's think of some other Greek names and people. So, again, that was just a fun episode.
Socrates' sister. And buddy of mine for 20 years now, he constantly quotes just lines from that one episode. So it's pretty cool.
Really?
Yeah. But pretty much if he doesn't know anybody's name, he'll just say Iphigenia. People just look at him like, what are you talking about?
I love to hear that. That's fun. That's fun to hear.
That's great. Show. And of course, X-Files, that is a major show to be involved in. What was that experience like?
X-Files was a really interesting experience. Harts of the West had just ended, and I got on X-Files, which was very hot. I came on in the middle of the season. I get to write a script. And I had written a show, an episode where, guy is brain controlled by actually a brain that's in a jar, the sort of mentally challenged individual.
Was that Roland?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Zelcho Ivanek is playing the mentally challenged brothers. He's one half of a twin. And the other twin was theoretically killed in a car crash, but now we realize his brain is kept alive and is controlling Roland. But I have a scientist get killed in the wind tunnel there, and it was Surnow was the scientist's name, and I did that because it was Joel Surnow, who I worked with on Covington Cross. And so after the episode airs, I get this phone call from Joel, like, "Did you have to kill me like right away? I mean, really?" So he was a good sport about it. That was fun. Roland was an interesting script to write as my first X-Files script. And the first draft I did was, I will say, completely off target in the sense of they sort of gave me the direction that Mulder's always 2 steps ahead of everybody. And I took that literally. So all my dialogue and conversation was like 2 steps ahead. He would say one thing, and then you think like a chessman, what are the next 2 moves he would make? So he'll say that third thing after that. So it got rewritten heavily, but to the better, and I learned, that's what they mean when he's 2 steps ahead, But it turned out very well. When we were in the mixing room, we were in the sound stage, and they're mixing Roland. One of the mix guys is watching Zelcho Ivanek do Roland, and he goes, "This is like the best actor I've ever seen do somebody who's sort of challenged this way." And the reason I know that is because my brother is mentally challenged, and this guy has nailed it. And that was, really high praise. And I thought Zelcho Ivanek was a terrific actor, and he still is. But when he did Roland, it was pretty amazing to watch him, and that was fun. The guys on there, Morgan and Wong, were there. And Gordon and Ganza, Howard Gordon and Alex Ganza were on staff there. So it was a pretty neat group of people to work with.
Very cool. You wrote 3 also?
Yeah, That was sort of a parallel universe. I was working on that, and they had another vampire script working that actually Paul Brown from Quantum Leap was writing.
Oh, cool.
And it was sort of like a parallel development. I think they couldn't decide which way to go. They liked both approaches, and it put them both into play. And 3 got made, but just the ideas of vampires was very interesting to me and to them. So that worked out.
You were also a script consultant on X-Files. What does that job entail?
Well, a script consultant is a glorified way usually to say we're going to pay you less. Which usually means this. let's say you're normally hired and you're a producer and you're supposed to get, $1 million a week, and we're going to hire you for 20 weeks with an option for a back 20. Okay. I'm just making up these figures, but, so now if you're a script consultant, or you're a consultant, they'll say, we're going to pay you $500,000 a week, and you have to come in 3 days a week. That's it. Usually it's a budgetary thing, or also they're trying to, try you out in a certain way. Often what happens, though, is you go in as a consultant, and sometimes, not every time, but sometimes it's sort of like, oh, yeah, you're supposed to be 3 days a week. Oh, but we got casting tomorrow on Thursday. You should be there at casting. But now you're in 4 days a week, you're not, but my contract says 3, So you're in that dilemma. That doesn't come up too often, or at least not for me, but that could happen. So then you're in the terrible jam of, do I, adhere exactly to something, or do I go in? Because if I don't go in, the boss will be unhappy.
Right.
If the boss is unhappy, I won't work here again. So
it's a give and take, I guess.
Yeah, it is.
What's your thought on the enduring appeal of X-Files and the new season coming out in January?
Well, I'm curious about the new season. I want to know where Chris has taken it. And I used to see him all the time on the plane when I was flying up to do Outer Limits, because they shot it up there in Vancouver. But I think the Endure thing is they were great characters. Look, when you do a TV series, you have to have a willing suspension of disbelief. Because, look, if I was Scully, after about 5 episodes of seeing really creepy, spooky things going on, how could you say, oh, that's impossible, Mulder? That would never happen. You're crazy, But they didn't do that, because then the series would be over. The tension would be over. So you play it out. But I think people identify with that, and I think people want that stuff to be out there or to be true, They want the fluke man to be swimming through the, sewers or whatever. They just want those mysteries to occur, and some global conspiracy or whatever it may be, whether we know the date the aliens are coming or whatever it is, ultimately. They just like that. I think it had a little bit of what I would say Mad Men did very well, which Mad Men would pose questions and the characters just wouldn't answer it. They just have a look, or there'd be silence. You had to go, well, what does that mean? So with X-Files, I think they did the same thing a lot of times. They just wouldn't answer a question. So you're left hanging. So you hope to find a hint in the next one to answer that. And I think that's part of the enduring allure. To Chris Carter's credit, and the guys who wrote it all.
Chris Carter mentioned publicly that his hope is that this season does incredibly well and they get offered a few more seasons. If he did call you up, is there still a good relationship there? And if he asked you to be a part of it, would you?
Yeah, I'd certainly be a part of it. Yes, called me up like that. Every show you work on is like dating. You could be in love with this girl from afar, and then you go on a date with her, and it's like, you know what? She's great in so many ways, and we're just not clicking. It's not that she's a bad person, and I'm not a bad person. It's just not there, So that can happen on a show, and it's nobody's fault, and it's the showrunner's job to recognize that and try to get the best group of people he can together. So if he says, I'm not picking you up, it's not because you're a bad writer. It's just because it's that chemistry, and that's something you can never, fully grasp in an interview when you're interviewing for a job. You just have to play it out and see how it works out. So
I wanted to ask you a little bit about Lois and Clark, The Adventures of Superman.
Another fun show. Got to work with Mac and Simpkins, some other great people there. Bob Singer, terrific. Bob Singer was great. Running the show, he would always say, if you had a problem, don't just come to me with a problem and say, what do I do? You wanted to come to him with a problem and say, well, here's how I think I'm going to solve it. Then he was like, okay, great, yes, no, or what if we do this, X, Y, or Z, Always very helpful. But he always wanted you to try to figure out a way to do it first, which was a great lesson to learn. And Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher were great. They had very different personalities. Dean had this, big enthusiasm, boyish thing. He was an all-star, like at Princeton, like All-American or something, football player. Terry they just had different work habits, Terry might have to really study something sometimes and learn these lines, and Dean's might look at it very quickly and say, okay, let's go, or vice versa. But it was a fun show to work on. Again, we had pretty free reign in coming up with wacky ideas, which we wanted to do, and anything. Like I remember with the episode, Superman with two N's in it. Nazis in deep freeze, and they come back. I mean, how can you beat that? They're like, as everybody said, it's a cliche. Everybody said, they hadn't existed. You would want to invent them because they were such perfect villains so many times. They did so many horrific things. But it was just fun,
They had a really good on-screen chemistry, and at times it did remind me a little bit of Moonlighting, the chemistry they had. But I wanted to ask you, there's more than a few connections between Lois and Clark and Quantum Leap. Is that because you had all worked together previously, or is that just happenstance?
I would say sort of happenstance. I mean, things went on from there. Grant Rosenberg was working in an office down the hall. He was working on like Poltergeist. And we were, two doors down working on Lois and Clark. And then, cut to a year or so later, and we're all working on Outer Limits up in Canada, things like that happen. So it's more like you have certain writers have certain sensibilities. And when staff jobs open, sometimes you go to that pool of writers that have those sensibilities or have been on shows you liked. I think McNamara remembered me from Quantum Leap, but also from Briscoe County. So when they had an opening at Lois and Clark, I think he said to Bob Singer, "Hey, what about Chris Ruppenthal?" It's just one of those things. And when I worked on The Pretender, I got the job, I think, on Outer Limits because Carlos Cotto or Javi knew Carlton Eastlake and said, "Hey, you should think about Chris." And then I met Carlton, and away I went on Outer Limits. Just things like that work out that way.
Do you seem to get more work if you're just a nicer person to everybody and people want to end up working with you again and again?
I think that helps tremendously. I mean, I think, Don Bellisario, I remember one time we were considering hiring a writer just as a freelance job, and it was, partly, do you want to be in a room with this person? Not in a mean way. It's just, is the chemistry there to work along that you can brainstorm and do something with? And that's an important part of writing on staff. So that's what you have to ask and think about when you're hiring a staff to put together, is how will all these parts mesh?
You were also credited with being a producer on 45 or so episodes of Quantum Leap. What was your daily, day-to-day job as a producer of Quantum Leap?
Well, no day is the same on any show, but oftentimes if you're not writing your own script or trying to help crack another story, my job sometimes became rewriting scripts. So I might be, at that time on Quantum Leap, called in to polish a script from somebody else. And so that's what I did, or I added a scene or take a whack at this scene. And that was part of it, but my main part of it really was being a person to just write scripts. I think writers who are hired on staff is sort of to use a baseball analogy, you're not expected to hit a home run every time, but you're pretty much expected to hit triples. They've got to be able to count on you. You've got to be a go-to guy, a go-to woman that they know they can get a script that they can shoot out of you in this amount of time. That's not going to eat up their time rewriting and be a disaster. That's going to be on budget, on time and manageable. Otherwise, you may not be the right fit for that show or for that season or whatever.
Were there any things that they added to your job and they were like, "Hey, you're a producer, can you do this for us"?
No, I wouldn't say anything abnormal. We all got called upon to, once you sort of hit the producer level, to rewrite stuff or add stuff. It's not uncommon to be shooting something back then and say, we're running over, we got to cut a scene. So now you got to cut, these 7 pages down to 4 or something. Or vice versa. Every once in a while you run short and you go, now we got to add a scene. What can we add here with the people we have on the location we have that makes sense? And oftentimes on shows, when you add scenes, they tend to be like, 2 people in a room walking or 2 people, talking and this and that. And you have to dwell on the emotional because you don't have the time or money to do action. And often they turn out to be some of the best scenes that people remember, and they're born out of desperation.
Do you have any other memories of Quantum Leap that we haven't talked about that people would just love to hear about?
Wow. No, I can't say something super stands out, except that it was some of the most fun times in my life, literally, and sitting around talking and joking and cracking stories with people you like, and then later on, some of those people you run into again on other shows, whether I ran into Paul Brown again, or Beverly Bridges was on Covington Cross with me in England. Those are moments that I remember, and hopefully other people remember. Joe Napolitano is still a good friend of mine. In fact, I'm working on he's producing a movie that I'm writing right now, sort of a historical thing, sort of Indiana Jones meets the Patriot. That hopefully my first draft will be done, and we'll be taking it out in, I don't know, the next, say 2 or 3 months. So, we were just very simpatico, and he's a great guy, and so this is a real pleasure again. So, but as a Quantum Leap, no, it's just funny things happen. Whether I get thrown in a tank of water or whatever else, it was a great time to be there. People all got along. It was a special time in my life. I know I listened to the Don Belisario interview you had, and he was talking about his legacy of being Quantum Leap. I think it was because it really meant things to people. And I will tell you one thing. At the first Quantum Leap convention, we were up at Universal, and a woman was in the audience, and she was very pregnant, and she asked Scott Bakula to come put his hands on her stomach, and so like bless the baby. And everybody's like, oh, everybody nobody really knew. She was like, no, seriously, really. And he did it, and it was like the crowd was like, and how can a TV show touch people like that? Don did it, and he put together a group of people who helped do it. And I think that is the strength of Quantum Leap. And one of the things I really remember about it was, I think, as I said earlier at the beginning, it all had like a theme and messages in it, that the humanity of it. I think that's a good word. The humanity of it is what really got through. And as to the Quantum Leap fans, I'm thrilled and thankful and appreciative. And it means a tremendous amount to me that people are still out there thinking of Quantum Leap, because I certainly think of it all the time, and I'm glad to see that it's still out there sort of resonating.